everybody. Welcome to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. I am Griff from GA. Joining me today, Sergi from PWM, also of Styles Make Fights fame. You can bet we're going to talk about that. And look, I'm just going to tell you this. If you thought that you enjoyed the PWM podcast before, you ain't heard nothing yet. And I say that because, well, one, because I need a movie quote to start things off. You know how it is. But I say that mostly because we have a new TNT champion. It is, of course, Sammy Guevara, who shocked the world, beat Miro at the conclusion of Dynamite this week in Rochester, the place where, of course, the late, great Brody Lee is from. And for me, it was a huge surprise. I think for a lot of people, it was a huge surprise. The match itself was a lot of fun. And, of course, now we're left with a new TNT champion. So, Sergi, let me just go to you right off the bat. How do you feel about our new champ?
I think that that he's an excellent choice for a TNT champion. He's the kind of person that you want in that spot, which is to say someone who can put on a fantastic singles match on a regular basis with very different kinds of wrestlers. That's what you want in a TNT champion. That's what the TNT championship is all about, is showcasing multiple people, lots of different talent, guests, like we have Bobby Fish coming up, and also people who are on the bubble of being, world title contenders, but also people who are, haven't been featured as singles wrestlers at all. And this is like their one chance to really show what they've got. And, that whole mix, and Sammy Guevara is, like really all of the TNT champions, a great choice for being in that kind of a role.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what we've seen is a total validation of what the TNT championship is supposed to be about. And we've said it when Miro won, that winning it from Darby Allin made him look even stronger than he was coming in. And now we're seeing him pass that on to Sammy Guevara. And we always said that because Miro was presented so strongly, that whoever beats him is going to look better because of it. And I think Sammy definitely does. And we'll talk about his future first opponent in a second. Apparently, he's going to be carrying on that tradition that Cody started of taking on all challengers, some of them who aren't even in AEW. So we will talk about that shortly. But first, let's talk about the match. This, I thought, was pretty much what you would expect from a Miro match. Now, the offense was split, and actually, usually Miro gives up some offense. We've talked about why AEW likes to do this with heels. This time, it was fairly evenly split because Miro did have a very long heat segment, and you can see almost a minute of submissions as well coming from Miro. But Sammy and Sergi, you talk about this all the time, that whoever was going to beat Miro, they were going to have to throw a lot of strikes, that sort of stick and move strategy. Sammy obviously uses his athleticism as well. 3 dives from Guevara and 2 finishers from Sammy, which is interesting. You don't normally see that in AEW, but you had the GTH and then the 630, both of which Sammy has used as finishers. So that's how it went down. And for me, this was from a numbers point of view, from a stylistic point of view, this was exactly how I expected Miro's eventual loss to go. And we had talked about this before, specifically after his match with Lee Johnson, that it didn't seem like AEW was building for Miro to lose to a guy who's just as big, who can overpower him. It seemed like they were building Miro to lose to this kind of competitor, and obviously that's exactly what happened.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would have been shocked if someone like Lance Archer or anybody like that had overcome Miro purely based on power. That's definitely not being shown as his weakness, or even as the sort of wrestler that he often came up against. I mean, Lance Archer is the one example. Kingston is close to his size, but still smaller, And now I think, though, that I definitely disagree that that stick and move has been shown as the way to go. There has definitely been, especially since the DDT. You know, going way back to Lee Johnson, he hit a DDT and it was really effective. And then Eddie Kingston really made a point of saying, "Hey, I saw what happened there. I'm going to, I'm going to focus on the same sort of thing." And then he was also in a feud of sorts, a small feud with someone with a DDT as their finisher, in the person of Fuego del Sol. Which leading into Sammy Guevara, who also hits that move, I believe, as a sort of a tribute. So that's all of that is basically saying that, where a lot of times when someone is up against someone a lot bigger, that their use of grapple moves, of throws and suplexes and drivers like the DDT will go down because they don't believe they can handle someone that big, or move them around, and that has not been the case with Miro's opponents.
That's a really good point. And normally in AEW, when you see a match like this where you have a bigger guy versus a smaller guy, and this isn't obviously indicative of every match we see like this, but AEW does have a certain kind of style that they like to employ with this sort of matchup. And normally it's the smaller guy has a higher percentage of the overall match offense. They have a lot more simple strikes, a lot fewer strike downs, and a lot fewer grapples. I mean, it's not unusual to see 0 grapples from the smaller guy and 5 or 6 from a bigger guy. But in this case, we saw 4 grapples from Sammy and 5 from Miro. So again, it's a different play on what we've seen AEW do with guys like this traditionally. And for me, I mean, that's really cool because, first of all, I like the way AEW deals with the typical big man, small man matchup. I mean, I think there is something to be said for, the smaller guy, the sort of David and Goliath situation where the smaller guy fights from behind and, he's getting overpowered, but he just has enough in the tank. I mean, there is something to be said for that. But I like the way AEW does it because to me, it's a lot more realistic in terms of how a fight would really go between guys of this size. And if you've watched any highlights from like the first few UFC events where they didn't have weight classes, you'll see that this is often how things went between bigger and smaller men. So I do like I like it from that perspective. But even then, these guys show that because of the story that we've been told, they'll put a twist on what we typically see guys of this size do in a match in AEW.
For sure. Now, one other thing you said was that Sammy used multiple finishers, and I think it's important to clarify that that there's a couple of different ways that you can use multiple finishers. In some cases it's a submission hold that can finish a match, but sometimes they get to the ropes. Sometimes it's kickouts. That's a real popular one. This is not that kind of situation where those are more like to build drama. Of course can be overused and spammed. This was definitely a different case where he hit multiple finishers in a row and did not choose to go for the cover in between, and putting over just how much respect people have for, like, this guy is going to take more to bring him down, kind of a story being told there.
Yeah, absolutely. This sort of reminded me a little bit, looking at the graph, it reminds me a little bit of, the G1 is going on right now in New Japan. This has a lot of the hallmarks of a New Japan G1 match, because you'll often see that it'll go something like this, that someone has control early on, and then you get one guy who's coming back and coming back and coming back, and normally in wrestling, that comeback stops at some point and they sort of return to even, and then you get the finish of the match from there. I'm not saying that that's how it's done every time, but normally that's how you're meant to see that. Well, it often in New Japan, the comeback just never stops. The guy just keeps getting more and more offense, and then he wins. That's what this felt like, and if you're looking at the graph, that's exactly what Sammy does. I mean, he goes from 0 offense in the 8th minute to then grinding Miro down, and Miro has 0 offense in the 9th minute, and Sammy never relinquishes his control of the offense after that, and his offense just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. And I feel like New Japan does it a little too much. They do that trope, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. And in this case, You're absolutely right that what they're trying to put over is how strong Miro is. That Sammy, and he's smart, so he's not even bothering to go for a cover after the GTH. He's just going right up to do the 630. And I think the downstream effect of that is normally in wrestling when we see that, we're trained to think, oh, this move's going to get reversed. You never try two finishers in a row. The second one's going to get reversed. Miro's going to win. That's certainly what I was thinking when Sammy went up top. And so when he hit that 630, that was even a bigger shock than hitting the GTH for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's always the possibility that that he gets the knees up or something like that. I think it's really interesting that you brought up the G1, because another aspect of the storytelling that they do with almost every TNT champion, with the exception of the one really short reign of John Huber, is that that almost always the story is that being TNT champion wears you down because you have to defend over and over again, and your weaknesses are brought to the fore, and people are noticing and targeting them. You saw the same thing with Cody. You saw the same thing with Darby, and that's what you saw with Miro. The connection I'm making is that in a way that's like the G1, in the sense that as the tournament goes on, the competitors who are still in it are being worn down by the pace of events. The same thing that happens with TNT champions.
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but you're right, and that's often a story that is told, especially like Darby. That was a story that was definitely told with him, and it's because a lot of his opponents, he had a mix between smaller guys that put on, these very fast, very clinical matches. I'm thinking of his match with Jungle Boy, for example, and bigger guys. Like he had his match with JD Drake and guys of that size, where he really just took a beating. And then Miro comes in and finishes the job. And that was pretty much the story that was being told that whole time.
That's true. And that with a TNT champion, you can have a story where they're just worn down by the schedule. But with Miro, it was more of a story of it just has one weakness. It's one chink in his armor, and opponent after opponent keeps chipping at that until one finally is able to go over the edge with it. There was nothing particular. I know people who were debating why Sammy, what was special about this match, why now? And it's like Sammy didn't do anything different. He was following the same game plan that's been the game plan since Lee Johnson. He was just the one who was able to push it over, because it was a working strategy, just not working enough, if you know what I mean, because Miro was so strong.
Yep, absolutely agree. And it helps put Sammy over that he was the guy to finally make that work after lots of different guys had tried that particular strategy against Miro. Let's talk about Sammy as a champion, because we already know, even this early on, what his immediate future is going to look like. And it surprised me. I mean, I am not someone who followed Bobby Fish before I saw him in NXT. So it certainly surprised me that he was the first guy to actually go on Twitter and say, I want a match. And it carries on a tradition that we see going back to Cody's TNT title reign, when Warhorse got on Twitter and said he wanted a match for the TNT title, and he got one because there was a big Twitter thing about it. So now Bobby Fish just wants a match, and now he's got one, which to me is a really cool precedent, because there is so much talent now flooding the indie scene. I would love for guys to just be able to come in and have matches in AEW. I don't need to see Bobby Fish in AEW for any extended period of time, although, I mean, I wouldn't complain. He's great. But even if he's just in for one match, I think that would be really cool. And that's going to be Sammy's first defense. I think this is really interesting. I think the match itself is going to be really interesting. I think for me, it's pretty clear that Bobby Fish is going to come in and be the veteran heel. I think he's going to have control of most of the match. He'll probably have a higher percentage of the match offense, and we're going to get to see Sammy in a more traditional babyface role against heel Bobby Fish. That's the way it seems to be playing out to me. Is that what you expect out of this?
That wouldn't be too surprising, because I mean, if you look at the analysis that I did in Styles Makes Fights leading up to this, I point that Sammy Guevara, before his change of heart. And before there was a long layoff where he wasn't doing much singles matches. He used fouls a lot, and it went way down afterward. Now the match against Miro was went against type in that one way. You know that for the most part, what he was doing was real similar to what he had been doing since becoming a fan favorite. But he had a less volume of strikes. You know, he used strikes, but he didn't use them at his usual rate. And he brought back the fouls like in a big way. And you know, he did not take time to use mind games. Mind games are usually a big part of what he does. And against Miro, it's like, I don't have time for this. He was real focused on actual offense. You know, it's like, I'm not going to intimidate Miro, you know. So he just completely eschewed that. So it's my question is, of course, is that just because of Miro, or are we going to see more fouls and him being more of a, yes, I'm a good guy, but I'll do anything to hold on to this belt, kind of like Darby was? Or is he going to go back to a more traditional mix of offense, like you see if you look at just the average of things since the Inner Circle started feuding with the Pinnacle?
Yeah, that's something I didn't even talk about when we were initially talking about the numbers, but the taunt disparity, 20-2 in favor of Miro. I mean, that is, we see Miro taunt often. It's something that he does. And again, he does it like a lot of guys in AEW, this is sort of the Kenny Omega style of taunting, that he can do it either to get in your head or to get in his own. And, you know, depending on where he is in the match, the taunts mean something a lot different. And I think a lot of those 20 were trying to get himself back in it, because he was just sort of persuading himself the whole match that, you know, this wasn't going to be it. There was no way that Sammy Guevara could actually beat him in this moment. And then, of course, Sammy did. So I would expect for Sammy going forward that you would see fewer fouls, maybe not zero, but I think AEW has told the story of the Desperate Champion before. And generally speaking, Darby Allin, he gives up more of the match than Sammy does. I mean, Sammy is not a traditional babyface in that he's not always fighting from behind. And in fact, one of the things that I think makes Sammy really good is that he is really convincing when he's fighting from ahead. You know, and I think that that's a distinct difference between him and Darby. So I would expect to see the fouls go down when he's fighting guys of comparable size. And even when he's fighting bigger guys. I think Miro was a particular situation. But I would expect to see those taunts go up, because I think he will settle into matches a little bit more. He'll want to get the fans on his side. And I think against Bobby Fish, I think that's what we'll start to see. So I would expect a more traditional dynamic between him and Fish, and as a result, probably a more traditional match graph than what we saw between Sammy and Miro. I would expect to see more of the Fish on top, Fish goes down, Sammy comes up for his comeback, and then you get your finish. That's what I would predict. That's absolutely not a bad thing. That traditional classic match style, when handled by two really good workers, is the recipe for a really fun match. And I think Sammy Guevara and Bobby Fish are two guys that can handle that really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would expect it to be an entertaining match. I don't expect it to be, the match of the night, or anything that I'm. I mean, the big interest. The big item of interest to it is we get to see someone we don't see every week in Bobby Fish, and that's cool. And we may be seeing that on a regular basis, like when Cody was champ, and that's also going to be neat. But yeah, we'll see. They might put on a real classic and surprise me, but I'm expecting a pretty standard and entertaining match, but nothing incredibly special.
Yeah. I mean, I think I wonder if Bobby Fish is coming in sort of with a point to prove. You know what I mean? So
absolutely,
this will be
he has nothing to lose and everything to gain, as they say. So
Hmm.
it's wouldn't be at all surprising if he's out to prove people with the expectations that like mine, which is probably pretty common. Like, well, that should be fun, but nothing special.
Hmm.
He's going to want to prove that us wrong. That yes, we're
Yeah.
going to make something, that's going to make you go, oh wow, I wasn't expecting to be that great. So we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. And he's in the interesting position of this will be the most eyes that I think he's ever had on one of his matches, because he never had a match, if I'm not mistaken, he never had a match on main roster WWE. So he only ever fought on NXT and pay-per-view. So the million or so people that are going to be watching Dynamite, it's going to be the most that have ever seen him. So he's in the interesting position of being a veteran and a veteran of TV matches, who even this late in his career is going to be, in front of more eyes than he's ever been in front of. So I don't think nerves are going to be a factor. I think if anything, that's going to be a motivating factor for him. I don't know him personally, so I wouldn't know for sure, but that would be my expectation coming in. So I think that's a recipe for a really good match. And Sammy's going to out to prove that, he can turn in good matches as a TNT champion. The bar obviously is very, very high after Cody and then Darby and Miro. So, obviously Brody Lee was in there as well, but he had fewer matches than all those guys.
Mhm.
So the bar is very high to have good matches as TNT champion. So I wouldn't be surprised if this match steals the show a little bit.
Yeah, I think that another thing about Brody Lee's reign is that it was very different from the others in that it was a lot more focused around a story. He was
Right.
feuding with the Nightmare Factory. That was the story of his reign. Whereas every other champion, the story of their reign has been, I defend against a lot of different people. I'm not focused on one particular thing.
Yeah.
For a little while, Darby's the beginning of his reign was real focused on Team Taz, but once he got past that feud, it was very much a I take on all comers thing, along the same lines as Cody. And Miro is the same.
Mhm.
He's had a few people that have annoyed him by not going away once he'd forgiven them. But for the most part, it's just been defense after defense, and
Yeah.
and that's usually the story of a TNT championship, and that's why it's no knock on Brody Lee's title reign to say that it isn't like the other reigns in that way. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
he was real focused on a story, as opposed to a uh, a series of defenses.
Oh yeah. Well, and you need reigns like that, especially in AEW, where that is always the case with the World Championship. The World Champion has never defended even close to as often as the TNT Champion has defended. So it's important to have a title that is on the line. And now that we've seen twice the title change on TV with very little story going in, it's just sort of, okay, here's our match happening, and certainly is the case with Miro and Darby Allin, that Miro cut a promo saying, if you have a title, you have a problem. And then we get the announcement that Miro is going to fight Darby Allin for the title, and then he just wins. And now that's happened twice. That with Sammy, there's a little bit more story, but still, it's not like there's been weeks of builds and promos and segments and all that stuff. It's just been Sammy's friends with Fuego. Miro has beaten the absolute hell out of Fuego, so now Sammy's going to come fight for the title. Pretty basic stuff, but the title switches. And to me, I really like that, because now, whenever that TNT title goes on the line, you can never be quite sure that it's not going to change hands at any given time. And to me, for a TV championship, that's what the TV championship was always supposed to be. If you remember all the way back to when WCW did it, or I guess when they were GCW, they did that. NWA had one, and then ECW had one, and every time that was the point, that the World Championship wasn't going to be defended on TV, but their TV championship was, and that title could change hands. So you had to watch every match that the TV championship was in. And to me, the TNT title is basically doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much that type of that's the story that they tell regularly, and they do a good job of making it a little different for each champion, but
Mm-hmm.
also similar. It's personalized. Cody isn't Darby, Darby isn't Miro, absolutely, but the story of a reign where the the demands of being the TNT champion are wearing on anybody in different ways because they're different people, but it's a difficult thing to be. It's one of the most challenging. It's just, it's not something that anybody can say. I you could be a world title level person, but the demands of being the TNT champion would wear you down.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting story because it lets you move on. Because once you've moved on, you've been winning and winning and winning, and you have one loss.
Yeah.
So there's no reason not to say I'm going to rest up and I'm after the world title because there's nothing about having lost that match, considering all of the wearing down that had to happen to get me to that point, that says that I'm not someone who could beat anybody.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, former TNT champion Darby Allin has gone in a totally different direction, and he's gone to a feud that does not involve a title, but it may be, and you said this to me when this promo happened, it may be one of the most important feuds that AEW has done to date. We're, of course, talking about the Darby Allin segment with MJF, where, I mean, this was quite a promo here between these two guys. So this involved everything from MJF running down the fans to referencing how Darby Allin's uncle was lost in a car accident, and it was this was quite a promo and seems to be setting up. And also, to me, what was really interesting was AEW has now, they've sort of tacitly acknowledged it before, but now just in real time and in no other terms, they have said there are 4 young pillars of AEW, and it's Darby Allin, MJF, Jungle Boy, and Sammy Guevara. And they've now just said that openly. Commentators are saying that, and they've said it on TV. So I think this is a very important promo for a lot of different reasons. But you said while it was happening that this might be the most important promo that we've seen in AEW. So can you explain why?
Well, I will tell you that mainly I was pointing that out as a humorous contrast with well, this is such a momentous, important promo, and why is there a little piece of white paper in Darby Allin's hair? It's like, what is going on up there? But anyway, yes.
Did you get an answer for that, by the way?
No, I have no idea. Well, I'm guessing that that he was doing some kind of a bleaching process, and that there was like stuff in his hair for that. I mean, nobody said that's what happened. But I mean, it does definitely give the impression that he was backstage, not even ready to come out, and then just heard some shit coming out of MJF's mouth, and just like, nope, I'm not even. I'm running out there. Anyway, but the thing is, I definitely see MJF and Darby Allin as a feud that they've been holding off. Like, this is something we have in our back pocket that was always intended to be at some point something that's going to eventually reach fruition and them to actually feud, and that once that happens, that's going to be something that will last pretty much forever. This is they're going to return to this on a regular basis. They're not going to feud every minute of every day, but this is going to be one of those feuds like Steen and Generico, just one of those feuds that just get exactly. Or Flair Sting, one of those feuds that they just come back to regularly, and I think that could be great. And I think that this promo did a great job of saying why that would be great. MJF's the thing that he believes he can do is he can get in your head by saying the worst shit. Like, I know the worst stuff I can say about you to start getting in your head. And Darby Allin's whole thing is, you don't there's no getting in my head. I like you start to get in my head. My head is not a place you want to be. You know, there's like that's not it's not a friendly locale. Do not try to be in my head. Like you cannot mentally break me down, MJF, and which MJF is just going to take as a challenge. Like, okay,
Right.
you think I can't? I'm going to show you that I can. And there's going to be a lot of mind games between the two, which I think should be really interesting because it'll be interesting to see someone who is going to be playing mind games on the same level as MJF is, in the same way. Well, not the same way, because he's not about like bringing up shit from Maxwell's past, but he's going to throw things back at him in ways that he's not going to be expecting.
I think this really highlights the difference between a basic feud like that's just designed to move a storyline and give us a good match, and a really intense, like just like a blood feud. And in fact, you can't have 6 blood feuds going on at the same time. And AEW's been really good at that they've really held back on some of these feuds that feel really, really personal. They tend to only do 1, maybe 2 at a time, and they rarely intersect. And you have to do that because with this type of thing, shock value needs to be a part of it. And if you're just doing this all the time, then you lose that shock value. The shock value that came from this promo was MJF actually going solo as to talk about Darby, like the tragedy in Darby Allin's past. Obviously, MJF has done this before, but it feels a little bit different because Darby Allin has been presented, sometimes literally, as an enigma, someone that no one really knows anything about. And even when it comes to his face paint, they've only ever really alluded to, there's some tragedy in his past, and so he feels like, half of him is dead, or, something like that, they've only ever alluded to it. And MJF is the first to actually really in-depth talk about what that was. And it felt important because we have seen feuds or matches between these 4 pillars. We've seen MJF fight Jungle Boy and Sammy Guevara. We've seen Darby Allin fight Jungle Boy, and I think also Sammy Guevara, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember if that match happened. Yeah, okay, it did. All right, that's what I thought. So we've seen all that, but we haven't seen, and we've seen MJF feud with Jungle Boy in the sense that there was a few segments. We've seen MJF feud with Guevara in the sense that the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle were feuding. But we've never really seen this sort of one-on-one intense feud between 2 of these young pillars. So it's important in the sense that these guys were all at first meant to be up-and-comers. They would be paired with older guys, and we've seen that in the sense that Darby has been paired with Sting. Jungle Boy was paired with Luchasaurus and still is. Guevara was paired with Jericho. All these older veterans that can sort of teach him the way to go. MJF was the star coming in, that he wasn't paired with anyone from the beginning, that he was his own guy.
Well,
I guess Wardlow, but...
No, he was paired with Cody. He just turned on his mentor,
fair enough. All right, you're right. Fair enough. But
he's the only one
that's definitely true.
Who's actually turned on his mentor so far.
Yeah, that was always expected, though. I mean, that's why I forgot that, because, yeah, it did happen, and I loved that whole storyline. But again, he was really meant to carry that from early on. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
That's true. You didn't go into it expecting him to remain the protege long term. He was like the snake that says, what did you expect? I'm a snake.
Yeah.
But it's a really good point, though, that although they've all had matches, I believe that MJF and Darby have been on the opposite side of a 6-man or something, but not a one-on-one match. They've all had matches against each other in different combinations, but they've never had a singles feud that's just this guy against this guy and it's real focused on that specifically, and
Right.
it looks like it's probably going to be a long-term thing. This is what Darby's doing for the next several months, and MJF as well.
Yeah, that right there is why I thought it was so important, this segment, because what you're seeing from AEW is them saying, we know that these guys individually are stars. We've put a title on Darby Allin. We didn't know this at the time, but they would in less than an hour go on to put a title on Sammy Guevara. So clearly there is some trust in these guys individually, but that trust usually is couched in let's pair them with guys who are more experienced and let them show that, oh, for a younger guy, for our pillar of the future, this guy is special. Now what we're seeing is, let's put these guys against each other, and there is no buffer. I mean, we are willing to trust in these guys, not only in a feud, but in a really intense, what I assume is going to be a violent, almost main event level feud that is going to see some segments that we've never seen before in AEW, and I assume is going to, not that I assume, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a match type that we've never seen in AEW before. So that to me is a real step forward, that AEW does really have trust in these guys. If you didn't believe it before with putting the title on Darby and now putting the title on Sammy, and also giving MJF the rub over Jericho multiple times, well, you got to believe it now. And it is big for MJF because ultimately, even though he did get several wins over Jericho, the final match, Jericho ends up winning. So this is meaningful for MJF in that regard.
Yeah. I think there's two issues with this that I think that are worth looking at. One is Adam Page. Just the case of, what am I, chopped liver? I am also a young guy who is the future of the company. I think that perhaps they don't see him in the same light just because he didn't start as quite as much of a rookie, even if he is about the same age as those other three guys or other four guys. He had a bit more experience. He was more on the main event level. He was in main event roles right from the start. Fighting for the first match, fighting for the world title, pretty early on, a tag champion, that he was at that. He wasn't someone they were building from nothing in the same way as those four guys, even though in other ways it's like he's also a young guy that's probably a major part of the future of the company. And another thing is, what are they? They mentioned at the beginning of that promo, I believe they were talking about both having their eyes on the World Championship. Did they say something about that? I thought that this might be leading up to them entering this ladder match, but I don't believe either of them are in it.
No,
where are they going with this? Is this going to lead to a number one contender match? What's happening with? And that's the other thing, is that MJF isn't just a guy who can be like, I want to feud with you because we're both future of this company, blah blah blah. He's also the leader of a major faction who inherently should have their mind on gold. Yeah. So what are you leading towards something with this strategically within the storyline that the character should be thinking about gold? So that's something to consider. Like, all right, what are we gonna lead this? Is this gonna lead to a number one contenders match at some point? And where are they gonna go with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And let's also not forget that for MJF, there's been a built-in storyline for him that's sort of been bubbling under the surface for a long time, and that, of course, being Wardlow. And a lot of people have talked about the possibility, and some would say the inevitability, of Wardlow turning face on MJF. So my question is, does that happen during this feud? I mean, because I'm thinking, like a chess player, I'm thinking a few steps ahead. So let's say that Wardlow turns face on MJF at some point. If that's going to be fueled during this feud, then it would imply that Wardlow, I mean, traditionally how this is done is Wardlow would cost MJF the feud against Darby Allin. And then if it is a Batista situation, Wardlow has to go on and win his eventual feud against MJF. So what you're putting MJF in a position of, over the course of almost 18 months, he will not have a win in a major feud. Because technically he lost the feud to Jericho. Again, he went over Jericho a few times, but in that final match on pay-per-view, he lost. So you're talking about losing a feud to Jericho. In this universe, losing a feud to Darby Allin because of Wardlow, and then losing a feud to Wardlow. So is that what MJF is? Is that what he's going to be? I don't know. And again, this is all, it's speculation because Wardlow doesn't have to turn on MJF right now. It's just, that feud's been there. It's there. So when ultimately are they going to pull the trigger on that? And I think that's determined by when are they willing to pull the trigger on Wardlow and make him a meaningful part of the company. Because if you remember when Batista did it against Triple H, he became world champion. He became the biggest star in the company during the course of that feud. So are they willing to do that with Wardlow? Is that something they're even considering with Wardlow? Where do they see Wardlow fitting in terms of all of this? I think it's worth thinking about as well, because for MJF, he's got several stories lined up between this with Allen, Wardlow, the Pinnacle. There's lots of stuff for MJF to do. So this to me feels like it's more beneficial ultimately for Darby Allin, because it gives him something that is really high profile for him to do, as opposed to just, hanging on with Mox and King like we saw before this promo on Dynamite, which he did. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a really good point that that Wardlow is still out there as something that's a shoe that's going to drop, because of everything you said. I think that that dropping that shoe anytime soon would just be a distraction from what's going on, and would be too many hits for MJF to be taking in a row. He needs some wins. And will that win be over Darby Allin, and what would that lead to? Is he going to be... Obviously, he's not a good choice for a feud with Kenny Omega. So are we talking about something that's going to stretch out until there's a different champion? There's a lot of factors that are involved in where they would go with this. I think that I have to take my fantasy booking hat off. That I just, we could talk about like, okay, well, he should win, he should lose this feud, he should come out on top in this feud. It's like, let's let it play out. We'll see how it goes. And it's one of those cases where nobody can afford to lose this, but somebody needs to lose this, and the other get the benefit of it, and have the trust that it will. There's always next time, because these guys are going to be feuding forever.
Yep. And for feuds like this, like you said, you don't want either guy to lose it. But for feuds that end up that way, I think the rule should be babyface should lose. It's easier for a babyface to lose than for a heel. Long term, it's much easier to build a babyface back. It's as long as he's established. It's harder to build a great babyface than it is to build a great heel. Just ask Roman Reigns, and all that came before him. It's very difficult to build a top level babyface. But once you've done it, it's easy for them to lose and bounce back, because it's always the built-in story is always the comeback for the babyface. It's easier to build a heel because it's easier to be a heel than it is to be a babyface. But it's much harder for a heel to lose a high-profile feud, because as a heel, your credibility comes in the danger of you winning. So as soon as you lose a high-profile feud, you have to gain that credibility back. So for MJF, I think he's avoided it with Chris Jericho, but if he does lose this, it's going to take a long time for him to get that main event level credibility back. So I would say that MJF should win, but I'm with you. I think we should take our fantasy booking hats off and just enjoy what AEW is going to give us, because something tells me that they're going to give us something different with this feud than what we've seen in the past. So this is obviously... Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, the thing is, all the points you make are true, but if you follow that cookbook too closely, you end up with heels winning all the time, and that's not fun.
Oh
You
yeah, no, no, no.
want to give, and that's the thing that AEW does really well. You see heels win a lot, but baby faces win surprisingly more than you kind of expect because we've been trained to expect them to expect disappointment, and it gives them the reputation of being kind of a babyface focused promotion, and I think that that's exaggerating a little because the heels do win a lot. You've gotta
Yeah,
give them, but the good guys tend to win in the end a lot more than you'd expect to, because of the reasons that you say of, well, how can the heels remain credible? And it's like they find ways. They find
yeah,
ways to bring them back. And so yeah, I think that that's why it's a case of that. Like I want MJF to be dangerous, but also, Darby Allin is just one of the really top favorites. One of my
yeah.
favorites for sure. So, but he can afford to take some L's and come back from them because he is just a scrapper.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a problem for him to lose. But I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way for him to come out on top and for MJF to come back from it and regain his heat somehow. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't care on a level. It's just like I want it. I don't want an outcome. I want whatever it is to be great, and I expect it to be great.
Yep, yep. Well said, and I absolutely agree. So this is what two of the young pillars are doing right now. One of the other young pillars of the company is, of course, now the TNT champion. And the fourth young pillar of the company is embroiled in a feud with the world champion, one of the greatest wrestlers that ever lived, one of the greatest factions in the last decade or so, that, of course, being Jungle Boy and the Elite. Jungle Boy had the opening match on Dynamite, which, as we know, is usually reserved for a very fast-paced, very fun match. And in my opinion, this was my favorite match of the weekend, Jungle Boy against Adam Cole. So this whole story that we've seen play out across Dynamite and Rampage between Jurassic Express, Christian Cage, and the Super Elite, this to me is a really fun story. I enjoy all of the promos, and of course Bryan Danielson is the guy who's inevitably going to challenge Kenny Omega for the world champion. I think at this point we're going to get that rematch probably at Full Gear, I would expect. It seems that's what they're building for. But for right now, dealing with Jungle Boy versus Adam Cole, look, this match to me was just, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I really, really enjoyed what they did here. It was so active. There was it was like constantly back. It was constantly back and forth, and it was very good heel babyface stuff. I think the fans played their part really well. You always worry that when there's a heel that's as over as Adam Cole is, that you will get the fans turning on a babyface or something like that. That certainly didn't happen in this match. And Jungle Boy actually got the fans to boo Adam Cole, which was awesome. This was just, it was an opening match that AEW does so well. It was very even and ends up with, you see the one foul on the board for Adam Cole was, of course, the low blow that ended with the boom and the win for Cole. This was just a really fun match. And if you're talking young pillars, Adam Cole's a veteran. He's been around a long time. I didn't feel like he was leading Jungle Boy through this match at all. I felt like this was two guys who are incredible professional wrestlers that just went out and put on a show, and I enjoyed every minute.
Yeah, it was a fun match. Definitely enjoyed it. And you're certainly right that that there was no issue of the fans turning on Jungle Boy. God, no, they love him, and they love him enough to boo Adam Cole a little bit, even though they also love him. But I wouldn't say that for the most part that Adam Cole particularly wrestled the match as a heel or did a lot of heel a lot of heelish things, and I don't just mean cheating, but also slowing down the pace. Just like you said, it was a very active match. Adam Cole, other than the finish, didn't really wrestle like a heel very much. I would say that that it was just the the trading of offense where the audience decides for themselves who they're going to cheer and boo. You know, the exchange of blows. The fans just love Jungle Boy a little more than they love Adam Cole, and they made their choice known. But yeah, other than that finish and the mule kick, there wasn't much by way of. There was no interference. There was no outside uh, elite presence at all. Not even the possibility represented by the possibility and distraction represented by having them at ringside, even if they didn't do anything. And yeah, the only foul, like you said, did lead to the end of the match. He did cheat to win, but he did not foul throughout the match, and he also didn't do a lot of the slowing down the pace and etc. Kind of ways to get heel heat. He definitely wrestles like a guy who, like I said in my Styles Make Fights column, wrestles like a guy who does not seem to realize that he's the bad guy. And I really love that dynamic within the elite of, Adam Cole returns and is like, just sort of tries to plug back into the elite of years ago as he remembers it, and just doesn't really acknowledge who the elite are now. And I think that's going to lead to some really interesting dynamics down the road.
That's a really good point. I never even really thought about that before, but you're absolutely right. It seems like Adam Cole is fighting a different style than what we're used to seeing from the elite traditionally, which to me is really cool. And we talked about it when he first debuted, that eventually, I think Gareth said this, that eventually Adam Cole's going to have to turn babyface just by virtue of what the fans react to him as, that he's not always going to be able to be the elite kind of heel because the fans are just not going to boo him like they boo the rest of the elite, which, by the way, they didn't used to. So I think that's really worth talking about, is that the elite has turned into the biggest heels in the company. They weren't always like that. MJF was a heel from the beginning and everyone knew that, but the elite were baby faces. Everyone cheered the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. They loved these guys, and now they're booing them. I don't know if the same thing's going to happen to Adam Cole. It's possible, but it seems a little different for him than it was for the rest of those guys. Looking at the graph, though, between Cole and Jungle Boy, I mean, this is, you can't, again, we talk about this with, you can't do it every feud with MJF and Darby Allin. You can't do this every match because people will just get tired. But man, did they do it. You just see, it's just a back and forth. I mean, just every time someone goes up, if Cole goes down, Jungle Boy goes up. And when Cole grinds Jungle Boy down, that's when Cole goes up. And you just see this constant, mirroring in the graph with both lines shooting up and down.
Basically just, minute by minute.
Exactly. And it's just so much fun to watch when guys are fighting at this level, because it's dramatic. It keeps you engaged as the match goes on. And in wrestling, people often say you need to have the heels get their heat. You need to have that so that the fans have their time to rest, and then the babyface will make their comeback, and the fans can put all of their energy into that babyface comeback. That formula is important, and AEW does do that, and you should do that. But I think the biggest thing, this is actually something that, for me, Kenny Omega is really responsible for doing in the modern age of wrestling, is showing that there are other ways to fight matches that are really effective, that you don't need to be some legend to be able to pull off. I think there was some idea that, only a guy like Ric Flair, only Sting, only Cena could pull off matches that are different from your typical formula. And I think Kenny Omega came in and said, you know what, I'll just do it and I'll become a legend because I do matches that are different than the typical formula. He did it in New Japan, he did it with Okada, and now we're seeing guys like Jungle Boy and Cole, and no disrespect to those guys, they're phenomenal, but they're not on the level of Flair, but they can do this match. And to me, that's just, it's great because AEW trusts these guys to have a match like that. and we were rewarded, in my opinion, with a really, really entertaining contest.
Well, and I think it plays into the story of, like I was saying, that I feel like Cole doesn't realize that he's even a bad guy, but because he's not wrestling like one. As you look at the type of offense that he's using, the number of fouls, the very few fouls, the one, and he takes one shortcut basically, which leads to the end. Of course, gets him a little heel heat because you want the after a match so dramatic, do you want it to end without it being decisive because you took a shortcut? And that's the way to, that's an alternate way, like you were talking about, of getting your heat instead of the usual way. But definitely he comes across that way of not even feeling like he's the bad guy. Whereas like the especially Matt and especially Kenny definitely feel like they're playing into a traditional heel attitude.
Yep.
But Nick, I think less so, and we'll talk about that more when we look at the match with Danielson.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about it now because
Yeah.
we're on the subject. So Nick Jackson, I mean, absolutely. This match was really, it was surprising to me until I thought about what they were actually doing. So you can see that Danielson was fairly dominant for most of the match. 61% of the match offense, lots of strikes, doubles him up in grapples. Obviously, the submission time for Danielson, I would expect that once we get enough match time from him, he will, in our database, become probably the most prolific submission wrestler in AEW. I think on the level of Angelico, who I think right now averages the most submission time per hour in the company for a singles wrestler. I would expect to see Danielson get up to close to that level. So it was surprising to me right in the middle of this. And then at the 10-minute mark, I sort of thought about it. I was like, you know what? This isn't surprising that we're actually seeing this. And the reason is because for as great as everyone knows Bryan Danielson is, think about who he is so far in the company. He's had one match and it was a draw.
Mm-hmm.
So from an AEW kayfabe kind of perspective, we don't actually know how good Bryan Danielson is yet. We've just been told how good he is. But we haven't seen wins from this guy. So this match existed to take a guy in Nick Jackson, who everyone knows is a great wrestler, a former tag team champion, and just have him get his ass whipped by Danielson for 15 minutes. And that's exactly what it was. That Danielson just destroyed Nick Jackson throughout the course of this match. Jackson had 8 fouls, and he still could not get the better of Bryan Danielson for any significant stretch of time. And to me, that's what this story was about. That Danielson is dominant, and when people say that Bryan Danielson is a wrestler on the level of world champion Kenny Omega, that this is what they mean. And that's what this match existed to do. And I think it did its job. To me, it wasn't the most entertaining match because of that. It wasn't dramatic the way that Jungle Boy versus Adam Cole was. So it didn't have that level of entertainment. But it was still a great match fought between two really, really good pro wrestlers, and it told its long-term story in a very meaningful way.
I think that you are biased towards baby faces from underneath stories.
I think that's fair.
I think that a lot of fans, that perhaps a little bit more than you do, enjoy watching a babyface kick ass. And
That's
if
fair.
you enjoy that, you got to see that. And Danielson does a great job of that, of just being that character. One of my favorite examples of that is NXT long streak era Asuka, just someone that, or Samoa Joe back when he was on any of his rampages, whether in NXT or TNA, just someone who comes in and kicks butt, and everyone just chants for, like, Joe's gonna kill you, or in this case, you're going to get your head kicked in. So that was fun. And another thing that's really interesting, if you look at the chart that I put up of comparing the first and second match, because we don't have a lot to look at, but when I looked at Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson and looked at the chart, I was like, I expect, just on what I'm seeing so far, I would be very unsurprised if his future matches look a lot like this, but with a little bit more volume in each category, because he's not holding back, because he's expecting a long battle within kayfabe or outside of kayfabe, because he knows he needs to. This is going to be 30 minutes. So he's got to, pace himself, and that's really what you see is that it's the same basic mix of volume strikes are his biggest thing. Well, no, excuse me. Submissions are his biggest thing. Relative to everybody else, he uses submissions more than anybody really, and then volume strikes next. And you see that he cranks submissions. He goes back to them regularly, but that he also has these rapid strikes. He's not going for strike downs for the most part. He has you up against a turnbuckle, and he's striking you repeatedly. And he's striking you for pain, as opposed to trying to knock you out. He's torturing you, and this is not a normal babyface thing. But for him, it is a babyface thing because people are just. What's the word I'm looking for? Vicarious. These guys have been pissing the fans off over and over again with just how they dress, how they act, how they pack up and get unfair advantages, and getting to see somebody just torture one of them. And the story that they're telling here is, I understand I have to build up my wins in order to get a world title shot. And since I need to do that anyway, I'm going to do it against each and every one of you. That's definitely where they're going with this. Like, we're starting with Nick Jackson. We're going to run through all of you. Actually kind of like what what Malachi Black did to the Nightmare Factory. Excuse me, family.
That's a good point.
But yeah, the volumes are higher, but otherwise the general mix is about the same. Just not bothering with unorthodox offense much. Not a ton of vowels. Not a ton of mind games. Not a lot of avoidance. You'd kind of expect someone as technical as him to use a lot of reversals and ducks, but he just doesn't really bother with it much so far. But you're just really focused on submission holds and volume strikes and some dives. And it doesn't use a lot of grapple moves, but he doesn't avoid them as much as some. There's a few mixed in of throws and suplexes and such. And it's a really effective mix. And just comparing the elusive strategy that he used in his first match with the word I have is reckless for the second one of just tons of offense given and offense received, and just not going straight ahead. It was just a really entertaining. It was. I agree that it wasn't dramatic in the sense that Danielson, there was never any feeling of him being in danger. Even when the heels were up and when Matt was getting in a little outside offense with the ref distracted, he very much was expected winner and the eventual winner, and there was no gasp of can he do it? Like, of course he can do it, and it's just watching him, the process of how he does it. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that Nick was able to reach the ropes on the label lock, and he fell to the cattle mutilation, and that's really interesting. Is that he has gotten finishers? He's gotten wins off of what has not been. I mean, it's not like he's gotten wins off of LeBell Lock because he hasn't had any other wins so far. But
Right.
it definitely has been presented as his main finisher. You know, the LeBell Lock has been, that's the move that he gets you in the lead up segments where he's showing that I could beat you. And that it's interesting that he got a win off of not a primary finisher here. So it definitely puts forward the idea that his primary finishers are the only ways that he can beat someone who's a world title level guy. But his other moves, if you're not a world title level guy, enough,
That's a really good point. I think he's being presented in a similar fashion to the way like a Zack Sabre Jr. gets presented. That submission master style. And if you've ever watched any Zack Sabre Jr. matches, commentators tend not to sell one particular submission from him as if it's like, oh, this is the dangerous one. There's several that he employs that commentators sell like, this has finished matches in the past, and it's because they have. Sabre has gotten submissions to several different moves that he has done in the past, and I like Danielson being presented that way because to me it's much more, I don't want to say much more believable, but it is more believable if you're a submission wrestler that can employ multiple submissions to get the finish. There is something to be said for someone like Pac, who has one submission, it's presented as one of the most dangerous in the world, and when he puts it on, you're done. And that, of course, being the brutalizer, there's something to be said for that. And for Pac, it works. But I think for someone like Danielson, who they're planning, in my opinion, on pushing as the best submission wrestler in the world, like that's going to be his MO, to me, it's much more effective if you do that by presenting him as having multiple submission holds that are really effective, as opposed to just saying he's got the LeBell Lock and that's it. Because then I'm like, okay, well, so if you just never allow him to lock in the LeBell Lock, you're fine. And like you said, maybe for someone on Kenny Omega's level, that might be the case. But if you're not on Kenny Omega's level, it's not enough to just stop him from getting the LeBell Lock. You have to stop him from getting the cattle mutilation and maybe the arm bar, which we saw him use. There's lots of different things that he can do, and he sells all of them. He's so good at making those submissions from an offensive perspective really, really look painful. A lot of times we talk about, you have to sell submissions like they're painful, but for someone like Danielson, the submissions do the selling. You know what I mean? And he's one of the best, maybe the best, at actually doing that. One thing that I want to point out with the graph that's really interesting is Craig often likes to talk about this, the number of minutes where guys are ahead offensively. And this one's actually split. So in 16 minute-by-minute chunks, Nick Jackson is ahead in 8 of those, and Danielson is ahead in 8 of them, which is really interesting for a match that we both agreed really didn't have any doubt as to who the winner was going to be. And at no point did you have any reason to doubt who the winner was going to be. And yet, minute by minute, it looks as even, if not more even, than Jungle Boy versus Adam Cole. And I think what that comes down to is Bryan Danielson, he's actually showing that you cannot get the offense over him for any meaningful period of time. So it's like I said, Nick Jackson uses 8 fouls in this match. So basically 1 foul every 2 minutes or so in this match. And Danielson at no point allows that to control him for any longer than 4 minutes. 4 minutes is the longest Bryan Danielson went without being on top for any minute. So that's different than what we see from a traditional heel babyface match, because usually the heel gets control and they have it for a long time. But in this one, it's back and forth in the sense that when Nick cheats to get the heat, Danielson doesn't allow him to stay on top for very long. So it's just a different twist on the same sort of back and forth style, the back and forth kind of graph that I was just praising with Jungle Boy and Adam Cole. This is a similar thing, but it means something very different in the context of the match we saw it in.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's a really good point. I hadn't looked at it that way. Um, Another way of saying it would be that that Jungle Boy versus Cole, you had a match that, except for the ending, played out a lot like a face versus face match of them just honestly and just back and forth with lots of legitimate offense. Just one would take control, the other would take control, just because they're both going full speed ahead. Whereas the story in Danielson versus Jackson was much more of a case of Nick trying to play out a normal heel match, but Bryan just not allowing it. Just like Nick trying to go into a heat segment and Bryan just getting the comeback quickly. Not it not being extended the way that it normally would be. Yeah, that's interesting. I agree completely.
Well, and to your point, this is something. So Craig doesn't usually do this. He's done it a couple times, but I hope that this is something that he will start to do more. So by the way, if you like this, go find him on Twitter or comment. Let him know that this is something that you want to see. This is the total match flow on a minute by minute basis. Now, this is really interesting because mostly what I'm looking at here is the graph. And so, to Sergi, to your point, when Nick tries to take over, Danielson is just not going to let him do it. And you can see that on this match flow, which is the combined offense of both men over the 16-minute period, you see one point where it really dips, that 8-minute point where Nick starts to get the heat. And immediately it goes right back up. So immediately as Danielson senses that, or I mean, it's hard not to sense a spear by Matt Jackson on the outside, but immediately as that happened, Danielson understands, okay, now I got to get back into this match. And that's exactly what he does. So you can see that immediately the offense trends back up because now Danielson's getting more involved, Nick gets more involved, and we're back off to the races. This to me is exactly what I would expect from Bryan Danielson, which is that he is presented not only as being great physically with his submissions and everything else, but also as being one of the smartest mentally. That he can outthink you and he can win a match before it even begins because he's so intelligent and he knows what you're going to bring to the table, what you're going to do. And so to me, I would like to see him in. It's more evidence that if AEW is depending on what's going on with Adam Page, if he's not going to be able to come back in the near future and be world champion. I hate to say it because I'd feel kind of bad for him that he wouldn't get to be world champion the way that it seemed like he was going to. I mean, I don't feel that bad for him. I mean, he had a kid, so that's obviously more important than the world championship. But in the sense of being in AEW, if that's going to be the case, Bryan Danielson to me is making a really good case for him to be world champion, for him to actually beat Kenny Omega at Full Gear and win that title. And graphs like that, like the match flow, is the exact reason why, that you can really get into the nitty gritty and tell that story of how smart Bryan Danielson is, and how difficult it's going to be to beat him. And you can tell that story as a babyface. It's okay. But he's going to be a much different world champion than what we've seen. I mean, we've seen heel Jericho, like comedy heel Jericho. We've seen heel Kenny Omega that has blown open the Forbidden Door. And we've seen badass babyface Jon Moxley. We have yet to see a really like a workhorse babyface champion the way that Bryan Danielson could be if he wins the title. And matches like this, it is evidence to me that maybe that's where Danielson would fit in AEW.
It's certainly possible that he could be the next champion. I know a lot of people will be very disappointed because people are very invested in Adam Page's storyline and in his comeback from, there's no point in telling the story of the decline of a babyface, of them reaching rock bottom and climbing their way back up if they can't reach a pinnacle. Wrong word, but but if for some reason they weren't going to go with Adam Page, it would certainly be a great other direction to go. But there are so many other things that Danielson could do. If they have their mindset on, people have fantasy booked. Adam Page is not so much a fantasy book as clearly that's where the storyline is going. But a lot of people have said, well, MJF is clearly the next guy after that, and then people are less confident after that,
Right.
or at least if they are confident, they're probably a little yeah, you shouldn't be, because
Yeah,
who knows.
exactly.
But that's the one that has the most consensus of people who do want to project things out. And if they were going to stick with that, if Adam Page is next, and if MJF is probably after him, et cetera, there's so much other stuff that they can do with Danny that doesn't require him being the champion. He's made it clear that aiming towards the championship is something that's on his mind at this time. But if he shoots his shot and gets denied for whatever reason, it's not going to be a case of he just wasn't good enough. It's going to be a case of a lot of shenanigans were involved in preventing it. If he shoots his shots and it doesn't work out, he's not going to be the guy who says, well, that wasn't fair, I need another shot. He's going to be the guy who says, well, I'll get back to grinding. And there are so many other things that while he is grinding, that he can be doing, that it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be interesting. He can be working with the young guys like CM Punk has been doing, but also there is always the possibility that nobody's really even talked about yet. CM Punk hasn't talked about Danielson. Danielson hasn't really talked about Punk, but it's bound to happen at some point, right? And how awesome could that be? Feuding, yes, but actually the one thing that they have mentioned is we've always thought about being a tag team, and it's like, okay, that could be something too. I mean, can you imagine Punk and Danielson versus the Young Bucks, Punk and Danielson versus any of the great tag teams that they have on this roster. So there's plenty of other things for him to do. So I don't think it's inevitable at all, but he'd be a fantastic champion. And if Adam Page is the next champion, that doesn't mean that Danielson won't be the champion a year or two down the line too.
Yeah, it's a really important point to think about. And let's also remember that we are talking about Danielson only in the context of AEW, but he was very clear that he wanted to do other stuff other than just AEW. And now that is a possibility. So I'm thinking of, Danielson has so many connections across all of professional wrestling, and he's so worldwide, just a beloved character in wrestling that,
and respected.
Exactly. Are we going to see, Danielson maybe branch out of AEW and further that AEW, being the central hub from which, all of the forbidden door breaking goes on? So can we see Danielson go over to New Japan, become the US champion, and really make that a more integral part of AEW than even when we saw Moxley and Archer as champion? Could we see him go over to Ring of Honor, go back there, and maybe become possibly pure champion, and make that title a part of AEW? I think those are absolutely possibilities for him, and that's what comes to mind. I mean, he could go anywhere, win titles on any indie promotion that he wanted to, and bring them back to AEW. We've seen AAA do that, and we've seen now the Lucha Brothers carrying around their AAA titles, and Andrade, calling that out. And I think we're going to get a match for those titles at some point. And obviously Kenny Omega is a AAA. I think he's still the AAA Mega Champion, and that was a part of his whole deal for a long time. So that's also a possibility for Bryan Danielson, if he's going to be a guy that furthers that shattering of the Forbidden Door and brings some other titles and makes them prominent in AEW. I think that's also a possibility for him.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. Along those lines, when CM Punk first came in and they were asking him about the Forbidden Door, Punk's reaction was, I'm Tony Khan's guy. What he asks me to do, we'll have a conversation about. If he wants me to be in the G1, I'll do that. And then there was a pause of, Not that I want to be in the G1. CM Punk's mind is not on a huge round robin tournament. Like that's
Yeah.
like I'm willing to work, but I'm not willing to work that much. Danielson is the opposite.
Yeah.
Danielson specifically wants to do the G1,
Right.
and I expect to see him in it soon.
Yeah.
The next one that they just had one, right?
Yeah.
But yes,
I think it's going on right
next
now.
year's.
So
It's not
yeah.
even done yet. Yeah, but next year's, I would be shocked not to see him in it. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and also, at Wrestle Kingdom, fighting for something, whether it be their world championship or, like you said, their U.S. championship.
Yeah. Or, just him picking a guy in New Japan and going, yeah, let's fight. Let's fight at Wrestle Kingdom. And there's a few guys that come to mind. He could do that with Tanahashi, Okada, Ishii, Suzuki. I mean, there's guys that come to mind where Danielson could just walk in and be like, yeah, we're fighting. We're fighting at Wrestle Kingdom. And people will go, all right, those guys are fighting at Wrestle Kingdom. There's just so many possibilities. And
dream matches, we call those. Yes.
Exactly. And as the world continues to open up, as Japan starts to make more forays into the U.S., I think there's more and more of a possibility that matches like that not only happen at places like Wrestle Kingdom, but matches like that could happen on AEW TV, AEW pay-per-view, things like that. They already teased it a little bit. Tanahashi's been on AEW. He cut a promo on AEW TV. Unfortunately, his match with Archer didn't happen on AEW, which I'm disappointed by, but maybe that's something that they're saving. And something like Tanahashi versus Danielson, that's a dream match that I think anyone in their right mind would ask for at any time.
Well, I feel like the Tanahashi promo was intended to establish some antipathy between him and Moxley to lead to something further down the line. How much further remains to be seen, but that's like laying seeds for later on. The Lance Archer was just Lance Archer was more about Moxley saying, "Oh, you didn't challenge for that title until I didn't have it," and so fighting Lance Archer was more just a part of playing into that story.
Yeah. No, you're definitely right about that. But the overall point is Danielson. The dream matches between Danielson and guys in New Japan or guys in Ring of Honor, and those two are just the ones that come to mind. But Impact, if he wants to go there, I think that's one of the few places he didn't work before he went to WWE. So if he wants to go there, that's also I'd love to see him do that. And there's several guys over there that I'd love to see him mix it up with as well. So that there's lots of possibilities in the future for Bryan Danielson, whether or not he ends up winning the AEW World Championship. And I think that does depend on the status of Hangman Page. If he's ready to come back in the next couple months, then I think go with that story. It's still there. At this point, this is a fantastic way of bridging the gap between Hangman, when we all thought he was going to win the title, and him winning the title if he is going to come back in the next month or two. If he's not, put the title on Danielson. I don't think anyone's going to complain. I think even the most ardent Hangman fans, and we have several of those on the Pro Wrestling Musings team, would have to admit that Bryan Danielson as champion is a pretty good thing for all of us.
I don't know if I would agree that that we're not going to get any complaints. There are definitely some really dedicated Hangman fans who will not accept anybody else as champion, and I don't think that they're completely wrong in the sense that if there's not some real world reason why he can't, he should be the next champion. But it is possible that there is some real world reason why he can't. He may, like, I'm a new dad and I'm stepping back. I'm not going to be a very active competitor for a couple of years. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying that that's a situation that I can imagine where it would make sense that they say, we need to go in a different direction. And if for whatever reason they have to go in a different direction, obviously Danielson is a great one to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I think we're all forgetting that for people that become new dads, that's often the thing that happens is you realize this is my priority, and I'm not willing. I mean, people do that with desk jobs, let alone a job where you're going out and you're putting so much stress on your body, risking life and limb out there in professional wrestling. If Hangman has a kid and says, you know what, I this is what I'm about, and I made money with pro wrestling, and I want to be about my kid now. I absolutely support him in doing that, and I think that's a fantastic thing for him to do, an honorable thing for him to do. I think we're seeing Moxley, who just had a kid, and we all forget that Moxley is a complete enigma when it comes to he's having a kid, and he's doing hardcore matches against Suzuki, like months after he has a kid. That is not typical of what happens when you become a new dad. So I think we all forget that Moxley is an enigma in that regard. A lot of us did, myself included, expected that barbed wire death match was going to be the swan song for Moxley, and he was going to step away and take some time away from pro wrestling. And then he ended up not. It surprised me. But if Hangman is the one to do that, then more power to him. I respect the hell out of him for doing that. And like you said, Danielson as champion, tremendous backup plan.
I hear what you're saying, but on Moxley, as crazy as he is, the route he's taking of wrestling everywhere, because I mean he's scheduled in matches in all kinds of like crazy indie shows. Is like he's fighting Jimmy Jacobs, who I did not realize was back to wrestling actively again. Like, wait, the Match of the Year song guy, the Ballad of Lacey guy, he's fighting him. But anyway, point being. Yeah, he fought in Bloodsport. Exactly, and yeah, the GCW fight. He actually went forward with his feud with his old nemesis. Who's the GCW guy?
Nick Gage.
Nick Gage, yeah, it's like, and he's going forward with that now. Oh my gosh, he is such a crazy person. But
he is.
That's not the only way that you can go forward. The nice thing about AEW is you have the freedom to pursue all of those other things like Danielson clearly wants to do, but you also have the freedom to work once a week and then go home and spend 6 days at home. And I think that's what we're seeing with like Cody. Everybody thought Cody was being written out, but he's not. He's just working 1 day a week, and he's fine with that. And hey, great segue. What a fun match that was.
You're talking about that tag match?
Yeah. I mean, both fun with like fun, great wrestling, especially on the babyface side. We'll call it the babyface side, because I mean nobody's more babyface than those two, Seidel and Dante. But just like really startlingly interesting storytelling between Lee Johnson and Cody. I mean, he started with a little bit of dissension with Cody not listening to the coach on who should start the match. Yeah. But then building on that with Lee Johnson just doing the yank from like it seemed like halfway across the ring to be like, yeah, over here so I can tag in. And all leading up to that crazy promo that everybody's been talking about.
That's it's a promo that I really respect from Arn Anderson, and the memes that have been going around online are something else. Go look at a few of those if you haven't already seen some of that. Look, this match,
Nyla Rose has the best Arn memes. Follow Nyla Rose on Twitter. You'll get all the Arn memes from her.
So here's what I really like about this match, and particularly what really brought me in was the yank from Lee Johnson to tag himself in. This to me, I'm not always the guy that likes to pick up on small storytelling beats and facial expressions and things like that. To me, I think that those are generally not indicative of bigger stories. But in this particular instance, the facial expression from Lee Johnson just said everything. That not only did he just yank Cody over so that he could tag himself in, but the disgust in his face that he had to do it with. That he's like, I'm so tired of this guy. and like it's so good from him, and credit to Lee Johnson that he knew the role he had to play in this one, both from a physical perspective in the match and from an emotional perspective with the storytelling, and he did it so well, and it made this match, like you said, just a lot of fun, and the story that was being told was excellent, and the fact that he goes out and gets the win, Lee Johnson does. You're doing lots of different things with this. That you're showing that he's frustrated with the Nightmare Family, or frustrated with Cody in particular. He tells that story, but also that he has a reason to be frustrated. That Cody is doing all this stuff. He's out for himself. And Lee Johnson not only is frustrated because he's a young guy, but he's frustrated because he's a talented young guy. And he goes out and gets the win and shows that yeah, look, you're going right past me here, but look what I can do. Look where I'm at, and I'm ready to take the next step, and you yourself are holding me back. And then Arn Anderson goes out and just says that, and he says just, in fact, he actually, I got to look up the exact quote here, real quick. From
I was
Arn
just
Anderson.
shocked that they went with it so quickly, like right then and there, because I was seeing the storyline play out in a physical way, and I really expected them to spend weeks letting that bubble under and be an unstated thing for a while, but like now we're going straight to the next chapter.
Yeah.
We're gonna come right out and say everything that's been implied already physically within the storytelling of the match.
Yeah, so Arn Anderson, the exact quote is, "I'm Arn Anderson, and all that implies, and I'll be damned if I coach a loser." Like, Jesus. Like, that really, but you're absolutely right. They went from this sort of bubbling under the surface, and it started all the way back with the Ogogo feud, that it was sort of bubbling underneath the surface, that maybe something was off about Cody, that maybe, things are not all right in Rhodes land over there. And now it's gone from that to now Arn Anderson just calling him a loser to his face, and splitting and taking Lee Johnson with him, and no loyalty from Lee Johnson at all to Cody. Like, there was no, like, that typical thing in wrestling where guys are like, oh, should I do it, like the handshake spot you usually see it with the guy with his, and they're having to, like, oh, do I shake his hand? Lee Johnson was like, no, like, I'm done. I'm going with Arn Anderson. I mean, there's just no hesitation for him at all. And I love that, because to me, the story that is being set up is to say that all these guys that once were very loyal to Cody, right? Lee Johnson was the first guy that came in and was like, Cody's responsible for, me coming into AEW. And this is what I love about, I love Cody Rhodes for what he did. And he's stepping up to defend Cody in several of these feuds. That now Lee Johnson, the story that seems to be setting up is saying Arn Anderson was the one doing all that, or maybe Dustin was the one doing all that, and Cody, he's a diva, and that and we're done with that. And that seems like that might be the story that's being set up, and I'm ready for that, because I'm ready for something fresh for Cody, and I'm ready for a guy like Lee Johnson to get more of an opportunity to show that he's not just a young guy, but that he actually has something to bring to the table beyond just being a future star. And also, I'm here for more Arn Anderson, real talk promos. I'm here for that.
Well, I talk a lot about styles make fights, and it's something I'm very proud of. Something I love to have more people read, and even more so, give feedback on. But lately, I have also been writing the power rankings for factions in AEW. That's just a new series that we've been doing of power rankings, just sort of subjective. Where there's no numbers in it, there's no formula, but just taking different aspects of what makes a faction great, and then the other writers weekly that they go to the other divisions, the men's, the singles, the
Right.
tags, and the women's. But for me, it's the factions, and the thing that people will look at and I think overrate is, how much star power is in the faction, how much
Yeah.
kayfabe ability is in the faction, and I think that they don't look enough at what's the cohesion. Does everybody have a role, and do they know what their role is? And the Nightmare Factory was, or excuse me, the Nightmare Family was like my example of a non-standard faction that is not at all concerned about everyone having a specific role, knowing what their role is, and having a specific goal of getting gold for these guys. This is the tag team. This is the main singles guy, and we're focused on their success. Like this, we're a team, and these are our stars. That's what a faction does generally. And the Nightmare Family was this weird bloated group that was more modeled off of like what you might see an MMA team look like, rather than what you would see a traditional wrestling faction look like.
Right.
And it is, in one sense, it was a case of Cody wanting to do something different and do some things that he'd seen in other sports. But another thing is, within the context of wrestling, it just didn't really work, and it was always sort of laughable. And the one thing that it was good for was creating betrayals, because that's drama. And it's just amazing how quickly it went from this bloated group of too many people with no specific role to all that's left is Cody and like literal blood relatives, his spouse, his brother. Yeah, that's it. Like everyone else is left. He is down to like just people who can't testify against him in court, or actual blood relatives,
Yeah.
And it's just it's amazing how quickly it just like the factory was the first step. And it's like, well, no, actually that's not true. MJF was the first step, but way back when. But the first big split was the factory, and I thought that would be it for a while. But then the Gun Club left, and now Arn took Lee. It's like, wow, just down to nothing. It's just pretty amazing.
Well, and I think that this is what this has been building to, because if you want to have that sort of MMA team style, I think there is room for that in professional wrestling. I think you can actually do that. But what it relies on is for you not either to not have a top guy or to have only top guys that can put their ego aside and go out and fight. And that's sort of the whole character. That was never the identity of the Nightmare Family. Cody was always the number one guy, beyond a shadow of a doubt. He was the guy that everything revolved around. And you had miles below Cody until you got someone, until you got to that next level of guy. So it was never going to work out like that. And now you're seeing the natural consequence of it, that a lot of people are saying, Cody is doing all this stuff, but really this is about him, and it's always been about him. And it's exactly what QT Marshall said when the factory formed, that it's always been about Cody. And what's unfortunate is that I think, again, this goes back to something that Anthony and I talked a lot about when it happened. What was unfortunate is that AEW moved too quickly with turning the characters of Cody Rhodes and Anthony Ogogo and losing the plot of the story that they were trying to tell at the time. And so people forgot that the story was really about Cody Rhodes' ego. And we all thought that QT Marshall was the heel and he was making stuff up. But no, I mean, I think what we're seeing is that the story really is that QT was right. And now Arn Anderson and Lee Johnson are right, and the Gun Club was right, and Cody is like you said, going to be the only one left. So that leaves the question now, and I think you and I can have a really interesting discussion about this because we come from different points of view on this. That should Cody turn heel? And I'll let you have the first word on that.
Sure. I think that the implication that QT was right. Well, does that mean that QT should be a babyface now? Clearly not.
Right.
I think that the issue is that
I mean, a bad guy can be right. That's okay. It's
exactly.
they don't have to be
But the
wrong
thing
all the
is,
time.
the thing is that QT is right that Cody's ego is at issue. QT is right that that there was a problem within the Nightmare family, um, but QT was wrong about the idea that Cody shouldn't be the star. I should be.
Right.
QT is not what if QT were the good guy, he'd be saying these guys are the future. Ogogo, Camarado, Solo, yeah, maybe not. But
The
these
first two guys.
these two guys are the future of this business, and that's where our focus should be. If he was a good guy, but
Yeah.
he is just basically splitting off to do the same thing Cody was doing, except with him as the focus.
Right.
Less justifiably because he is less interesting and less worthwhile as
Yeah,
someone
exactly.
for the focus to be on
Exactly.
than Cody. Cody at least had good reason to be the focus because he is really one of the very best.
Yeah.
And my perspective on Cody at this point and his story going forward is that he's very self-aware. He knows that people hate what he's doing right now, that people are really turning on him, and he's self-aware enough to realize that that he needs to be careful not to give them too much of what they want. If he comes out and just starts acting like a very typical heel, it'll be boring because there won't be that tension of we're mad at you because you're not you seem to be completely deluded about how we should be reacting to you. I want him to continue being deluded, completely think he's a babyface, and be confused by why everyone's booing him, and talk about like, why are you booing me? And talk about like all the things that he's done that are good, and all the reasons that everybody cheered him before, and how that none of that has changed. And I think that'll be a fantastic, great story and a great character trope that hasn't been done quite that way before, and I'm really looking forward to it. And
Well,
I expect that that's the direction they're going to go.
we know that Cody is a great heel. He's shown it in the past that he is really capable of playing that role and playing the sort of arrogant, just the arrogant prick. We saw him do it in New Japan. And we saw, I mean, really around the world, but specifically in New Japan is really where that came out. But you're right. It would be a very unique twist on it is for him to be arrogant, but in a very I'm a little arrogant, but I kind of deserve to be kind of way, that he's like, he thinks that he's being humble by not being too arrogant, but that it would be a very interesting take on that character. So I'm with you. I don't think that they should just I don't think they should just flip the switch and suddenly Cody is back to being like the New Japan heel that he was before creating AEW. So yeah, I'm with you on that. But in terms of what he looks like, I mean, I think that eventually the natural character progression will sort of take him through, thinking that he's the good guy, getting confused with fans, to eventually the crescendo being, okay, well, if you're going to turn your back on me, then, you can go shove it. And he will eventually turn on the fans the way the fans have turned on him. And I think eventually bring it full circle. He will put over, the next up and coming babyface. Maybe it will be Lee Johnson. Maybe it will be Anthony Ogogo or Nick Camarado. I would love to see any of those three guys get the I defeated Cody Rhodes rub eventually. And then something that we've said on the podcast before, that is a short-term thing for Cody, for him to leave, ironically, leaving as a heel, leaving as the way the fans wanted him to go. And then, in the future, if he comes back to the ring, if he comes back as an authority figure, whatever he does, he'll be a babyface for life because, the fans are always going to love him. They're going to thank him for creating AEW. And so he's going to be a babyface forever when he finally hangs up the boots, as a full-time competitor. So this is a short-term thing for him to make sure that he's remembered as a great professional wrestler and a great professional wrestling businessman, a great professional wrestling promoter. And I think he can do both depending on how this story goes. So,
Well, and I think that brings back something um, that's been causing a lot of debate lately. Since he's been sort of on the edge of turning, a lot of people are returning to the question of if he's not a baby face, if he's a heel now, does he have to stand by his stipulation? And I think you probably know my view on it. I don't want to ever see him act like that stipulation is no longer in force. I think that it shouldn't even be addressed, preferably. Or if it's addressed, either have it as a part of his delusion and arrogance that he still thinks that he is the honorable man who wouldn't go back on it, or just have it be something that is actually enforced and that it's not up to him. Either way, the thing that brought it to mind was you saying that he wants to prove that he's a great wrestler and a great promoter, and that was the reason for that stipulation, the out of storyline reason, and actually even in storyline reason. I mean, that's basically what he said. Like, I never want to be looked at as a guy who used his behind the scenes power to get title shot after title shot. If I'm not going to be champion, I'm not going to get shot after shot. That's not. My father was criticized for it. A lot of other people who were in my role were criticized for it, and I'm not interested in even dealing with that. And I'm all for that being stuck with. That's been my view from the start. I know a lot of people really disagree and just can't see a reason to be invested in someone who isn't aimed at the world title, but I just think that there are other ways that you can tell stories, and finding new ways to tell stories is something that has always been really important to Cody. That's just a big part of what he does. It's like, hey, what's something that isn't really quite a baby face or isn't really quite a heel? What's something that's that's a little more realistic in this way or that way? And what's a new spin that we can do on this or that? And this is an example of that.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I think eventually I would like to see someone have a stipulation, a long-term stipulation like that they do break. Because I think you need to have that once in a blue moon, and I really mean like once in a decade kind of thing, where someone breaks a stipulation like that, just so that it's possible. That's what wrestling is all about, is keeping you on your toes. And so, we talked about it earlier on in the show that, the TNT title can change anytime, because somewhere in the back of your mind, it's changed twice, really 3 times. I think Brody Lee's first win was very unexpected. So any TNT title match, you're thinking maybe just that little seed of doubt in the back of your mind that maybe the champ will not get out of this. It's so important to make sure that every match means something. And so I think for a long-term stipulation, someone has to break it once, just so that it's possible that when that long-term stip happens, that maybe we'll have a heel that decides to break it. All of that being said, it shouldn't be Cody. Like, I agree with you that Cody should not be the guy to do that because of all of the reasons that you said before. I absolutely agree.
I don't know if stipulations are something that we need to have that tension about, but I could be wrong. It's an interesting point. I don't know if I agree about stipulations, but I think that's a, excuse me, a case where we really need to see at some point a disqualification. That's obviously people will say, like, well, there's been a disqualification, but it's like that it didn't finish the match. That's different. It's different in an Iron Man match. The disqualification is a strategic move.
Exactly.
But
and that's how they used it. That's exactly the story that was being told.
But in a standard match, a one fall match, having a heel try to cheat, get caught, and get disqualified for it because it's bad enough cheating that it's not just a warning or a 5 count. that's something that we need to see. I don't want to see it regularly. I am
Yeah.
absolutely in agreement with AEW's general policy of it not being something that they rely on as a storytelling device, but
Yeah.
seeing it once just to show that the refs are not completely blind, that it is possible, that it's not just completely out of the possibility as a storytelling thing, I think would be worthwhile.
Yep.
Just along the lines of what you were saying.
Yep. I absolutely agree with you on that. Let's do some quick hits. Let's do some quick hits. Normally I have a pun for that, but I don't have one today. So we're just gonna do some quick hits now. Obviously, we talked about MJF and Darby Allin launching into a feud, and that has made us all forget that Darby Allin was actually in a match on Dynamite earlier on when he teamed with Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston to take on Bear Country and what's his name? Something Green. Is it Anthony Green? I don't even know who he is. Anthony Green, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to say about this match. It didn't really do much for me. I don't really care about what happened. Obviously, the babyfaces won. I don't know. You're a bigger Darby Allin fan than I am. Not to say I'm not a Darby Allin fan, but you're bigger than I am. So did this match do more for you than it did for me?
Oh, I don't know. I would go so far as to say it was fun. And I don't think it was meant to be more than that.
Okay.
It was interesting to me as the faction guy, as the person running Power. Until they had this match, I was like, I don't know if this grouping of Darby with Kingston Moxley is even an ongoing thing, or if it was very temporary. It's like, oh, okay, they are still allied. Okay, that it established that, and that's about it. And it was fun enough, but it wasn't anything special.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Dark Order has obviously had a lot of issues in the past. They go back to Brody Lee's hometown of Rochester, New York, and it seems like everything might be okay now in the Dark Order group after this match with the Hardy Family Office. It was a crazy match in the sense that there were so many guys, and so you can see in 8 minutes these two teams combined for 120 strikes between this. I do not envy Craig at all, by the way, of having to keep up with every single one of these, because these are not just strikes from the legal men. These are anyone in the ring at any point. That's what Craig counts for these, which is how you end up with 120 strikes in 8 minutes. So it was incredibly active. Obviously, the storytelling piece of it, that Amanda Huber, John Huber's widow, comes out and basically lays down the law with the Dark Order, says, get your asses back in the ring. You know, we're done with this bullshit that we've been doing here. -1 comes out, throws the papers. Really nice homage to Brody's time on being the Elite. And then Dark Order just, runs wild on the Hardy Family Office. The most important part of this match to me was what you said to me on the night in our Discord chat, where you said AEW protects finishers in such a big way that now, after Jorah Giral takes like 11 of them in a row from the Dark Order, that he's now dead. Just in kayfabe, he should never be alive again.
That was a lot of finishers that he got hit with. It was fun. It was a fun little ending sequence. But I think that the interesting thing about this match is the open question of was this just for the Rochester fans, in the sense of, was this a one night reversal of the disintegration of the Dark Order, or is it a change in the direction of the Dark Order? Are they coming back? And it remains to be seen. It definitely is certainly possible that that they have gotten over their storyline issues between them, but I have a tough time seeing that unless Amanda Huber has joined the roster as a regular member, because her as ongoing leader, I can see the Dark Order coming back to what they were a couple months ago. But if she's not there to keep them in line, I think that they're still going to just go back to falling apart next week.
Yeah.
Not that that's something I want to see, but I just logically I don't see. Everybody seems to have put their differences aside just for sentimental reasons, but the differences aren't gone.
I'll add a third option to that, and that is Bray Wyatt or Wyndham Rotunda.
Oh, right. a new leader is always certainly something possible with the Dark Order. I think that that people um, feel a lot of people feel strongly that that they don't want to see a new leader. That they would feel it would be wrong for there to be a new leader. That different guys in the Dark Order have said we're not looking for a new leader. We don't need a new leader,
Yeah.
but they are falling apart.
Right.
So
So
it's a storyline justification of, well, maybe we do in fact need a new leader.
generally speaking, I would say that's true. There's no one in AEW right now that I would want to see as leader of the Dark Order, and I think in general, I agree that there shouldn't be a leader unless it's either Amanda Huber, and I'm not sure how that would work. Just she would be sort of like the matriarch of it that would keep everyone in line. But in terms of being as active as Brody Lee, not even as a wrestler, but just as a promo, I don't know if that's something that she would be good at or be interested in. But having her there just for sentimental reasons would be cool, like you said. The only exception I would make for an active wrestler actually being involved is Wyndham Rotunda, Bray Wyatt, whatever he wants to call himself, just because he was so close with John Huber in life, and I think the two of them, we know, had a lot of conversations after Brody Lee joined AEW. So that would be the one exception that I would make, because I think he's the one guy that would know the creative vision of what John Huber really envisioned for himself and for the Dark Order. And obviously, just as a promo, he is so good. I mean, is unlike anyone else in the world. Bray Wyatt is, in terms of how do you cut a promo that just really like gets to your soul. You know what I mean? That just like makes your chest cold. He's unlike anyone else in pro wrestling with his ability to do that. So maybe it's a situation where a couple people from the Dark Order split and you get a return to more of a heel group with him at the helm. I don't know. There's a couple different options that you could go with, but he's the one guy that I think if you are going to give Dark Order a new leader, he's really the only guy that I'd like to see in that position.
That's a really interesting perspective. When you first brought it up, I was thinking you meant along the lines of, let's bring in a spooky guy and bring back what the Dark Order used to be, and have some guy saying, "Hey, this is what the Dark Order is supposed to be, and we're gonna bring that back." Just this is someone just being dark and spooky and making it more cult-like. The original impression that people got of it being sort of this creepy cult.
Right.
But then you pointed out how close Wyndham and Huber were personally, and it's like, oh, if instead they do something of, I knew his vision, I intend to carry out his vision. This isn't me taking over the Dark Order, but me continuing Huber's mission now that he's gone, and something that's a lot more respectful than I see this group that's flailing and I'm going to take over just as a power opportunity, but more as I really had a perspective, or I had inside knowledge of where he was going with this, and in his absence, I'm going to take over. Like that would be more interesting to me, or at least a lot more palatable for me, for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the way that I would like them to take it as well, and just sort of let him do his thing. Because again, just as a creative mind, he's given us so many things that we haven't ever really seen carried to fruition the way that Bray Wyatt did in WWE. And obviously he was fighting a creative team that was not always willing to let him carry out his vision, whereas I think in AEW they're much more willing to let guys experiment and follow their own vision. So I'm with you. I would like to see that. Dark Order's other representatives on this week of AEW was, of course, Ty Conti and Anna Jay against the Bunny and Penelope Ford in a tag match. This was pretty much only designed to get TJ over, and it did that, and it was fun for what it was. They I don't want to say dominated in the sense that they were ahead 1,000% of the time, and all of that. But certainly in terms of the numbers, 55% of the match offense, led in big offense 12-8. Anna Jay ends up getting the Queen Slayer, I think on the bunny. I forget exactly which one, but I think it was the bunny. And they ended up winning. So yeah, this match was good for what it was. I want to see Tay Conti. I want to see both of these do more, but specifically Tay Conti. I want to see her do more in AEW in terms of trying to fight for a title and having bigger opportunities. But this match kind of ends this mini feud, and it does it in, for me, a fairly effective way. What did you think?
It was a good match. It was fun. It wasn't anything special, just like you said. The one really interesting thing about it that they mentioned on commentary was that Anna Jay didn't come out in Dark Order colors. They came out in a coordinating outfit, kind of implying that that they're thinking about women's tag team wrestling, and specifically working as a tag team and perhaps creating a tag team division with a tag team championship. I don't know if the women's division is ready for that. I think that the secondary championship is what I'm really excited about, and I assume that that's coming with the new year, because it's going to be called the TBS Championship, and that's when they're going to TBS. Super excited about that. I don't know if they have a big enough or strong enough division yet to support also a tag division. But it is interesting to see some of the women actually acting as legitimate tag teams and not just thrown together tag teams, as TJ are doing.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, they're friends, and obviously the chemistry there is pretty cool. So that's always nice to see. The Rampage main event, Orange Cassidy against Jack Evans, hair versus hair. Man, I mean, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, it was a storytelling match. I am not the person that has said, get the Hardy family office off my TV. They haven't had a lot of go away heat with me. But in this match, I quickly became bored, just in the sense that I was like, we all know what's going to happen. There's a reason that Jack Evans is in this match and not Matt Hardy, right? I mean, it's obvious why this was happening. So really, this was just a storytelling match, and Orange Cassidy, I mean, he's always fun to see in a match like this, but it didn't really do much for me. I think this was my least favorite match of the week in AEW. Not that it was bad, it didn't do a whole lot for me. What did you think about this one?
I don't disagree. Orange Cassidy is always fun, like you were saying. It's definitely one of my favorites. Orange Cassidy is definitely up there with my favorites for sure. But he also, the haircut aspect of it, I think, was a real problem in terms of sympathies. The person who was most sympathetic in this match wasn't the Hardy family office as a whole, but
It was Jack Evans.
Just Jack Evans.
Exactly.
He's the one being victimized.
Yeah.
I felt like at some point it would have been kind of cool if the best friends had said, you know what? You didn't really want this match. We didn't need this match. We don't need to actually shave your head. It's cool. Go on.
Yeah.
And have instead Matt Hardy be like, you failed me. Yes, you are going to have your hair shaved, and get the heel heat on him for that, like more explicitly. I suppose that would potentially lead to him losing the losing the effectiveness of the Evans and Angelico as heels. So that has a disadvantage, but it just felt like it wasn't a very sympathetic spot to put the best friends in. One of the most sympathetic groups that there is. Yeah. So that was the one issue I had with it.
I absolutely agree. It's just I had an issue with the fact that stipulations like this, where something bad will happen to someone who loses, it's always tricky when you are going to have the babyface win. Because then the babyface, the good guy, has to do something bad to the heel. So the only way it works is if the heel is so despicable and has gotten so much heat that fans are chomping at the bit for the babyface to do something bad to him. Of course, the classic example is Austin versus McMahon. That when Austin does something bad to Vince, that he's the babyface, but one, that was part of his character, and two, everyone wanted to see Vince have something bad done to him. You know, whether it was him pissing his pants because Austin had the gun at his head, or Vince, getting beaten in the hospital. You know, like those classic moments. That is the pinnacle of that sort of thing, where the babyface does something bad to the heel. This one didn't work. One, because there just wasn't any heat on Jack Evans and very little heat on the Hardy family office to make anyone really care that they're shaving his head. And two, because the best friends are like the opposite of the baby faces that would do this to someone. You know, they've been presented as very nice. I mean, Wheeler Yuta is one of the guys involved. The best friends took him in and made him part of their group in the absence of Trent Beretta. So it kind of like, I don't know, it just fell flat for me, and to the point of like, I don't even care enough to say that I'm frustrated with the story, because I just don't care about this story. You know what I mean? It hasn't had go away heat with me until now, that it's still continuing because Matt Hardy and Orange Cassidy are going to be in the ladder match on Dynamite. So that was the first time that I saw that, and I literally out loud said, "Oh, go away." Like, I'm done. I'm done with this match. I'm done with this. I've not been that guy before, but I'm going to be that guy now. And I saw that announcement, and I'm ready for this to be over. And Matt Hardy needs to go do new things. Orange Cassidy needs to go do new things. Yeah, I mean, this feud has officially run its course with me.
I hear you. The thing is, it makes sense for there are lots of levels of it that make plenty of sense. It makes sense for Matt Hardy to be attacking Orange Cassidy's image. He's saying that, this is someone who his look is very important. It makes him compelling to his fans. His fans copy his look. I want to take that away from him. That's a great storytelling little hook. And then Orange Cassidy barely caring. That fits with his character. It fits with Matt Hardy's character to not put anything of his own on the line.
Yeah.
But then that leads to the point where you have a character who's getting sympathy, at least from us. It's like, oh, I feel bad mainly for Jack Evans. He was put in a bad situation, where his leader led him into a situation and then abandoned him. That gets heel heat on. The abandoning was good. That got heel heat on everybody but Jack Evans, but the kind of the focus wasn't there. Let's see. And, the thing that, other than also, like I was saying, that, it made sense to me if they went with the best friends saying, hey, you know what, you don't need to cut your hair. This wasn't your idea, right? If anybody's hair should be cut, it should be Matt Hardy's. And maybe proposing a hair versus hair match, like challenging Matt Hardy to one or something. Yeah. But another thing that really struck me as something that Orange Cassidy would do would be like to say, maybe it would be terrible, maybe it would be very genuinely damaging for him to change his look, but for him to say, you want to take my hair? Just like his character would just be like, I don't care. I'll shave my own head. This is this is the dumbest thing I ever heard. It's just hair. But I don't know. But on the other hand, he does have a very iconic look that could be very bad in terms of merchandising and stuff for him to suddenly change. But it's just the thing that comes to mind when Matt Hardy's like, I'm gonna take your hair, blah blah blah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's the thing about this isn't. I don't have heat because the story doesn't make sense. I mean, the story makes perfect sense, like you said. I just don't like it. That's as simple
there's
as
a lot of
is.
logic in it, but then it just doesn't lead anywhere much, which is a lot of the deal with Hardy Family Office. It's kind of their storage place for people they don't have any plans for right now, and that's fine. They'll have plans for them later. Everybody gets their turn.
Yeah, exactly right. And for me personally, I hope that Private Party is the next ones up that are going to get their turn. I'd love to see an extended feud between them and the Lucha Brothers. I feel like those guys can do so many good things in extended matches.
True. Well, the thing is, there's three. going back to what I said about like, hey, I'm the factions guy. I write about factions, and I have a regular column about it every month.
Right.
Um, One of the things, and this is the thing that I criticize Inner Circle about. They had a tag team, one of the best tag teams in the world, and they kept taking the focus off of them and tagging up other guys. Jericho and Guevara going after the tag titles, and it just felt like a betrayal of Santana and Ortiz, and
Jericho and
something that
MJF.
maybe they should have. And it's something that maybe that Santana and Ortiz always should have taken a little bit more seriously. But it did lead eventually to Santana and Ortiz saying, hey, we have sacrificed for the Inner Circle, and we did that because we were all about this faction, and that was important to us. But now it's our turn. We're gonna really, and they've been a lot more focused, and it's really been great.
Yeah.
Where I'm going with that is there are three really good tag teams in the Hardy family office. And that's one of the big problems with the Hardy family office is there's no focus on who's the tag team, who are the guys that we're going to push and help as a faction to get those tag team belts. You can't do it to all three at once. It doesn't make sense that they're each other's competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So we already saw Butcher and Blade go after the Lucha Brothers. So, maybe it'll be Private Party next. That's what I'm hoping for. Or maybe, the Lucha Brothers are embroiled also in this thing with Andrade and, over the AAA tag titles. So, who knows what's going to happen. But, yeah, I don't know. The Hardy family offices didn't have a whole lot for me to begin with, and now I'm just kind of apoplectic with the whole thing. That's
apoplectic. I do not think is the word that you meant, but yes,
that was
apathetic.
I was apoplectic. Yeah, apathetic is what I meant, but I was apoplectic last night when I saw that Orange Cassidy and Matt Hardy would be in the ladder match. That was the first time that I really. That's the first thing that has that level of go away heat for me in AEW, that I've just like verbally expressed my displeasure with no one else in the room. That's.
Well,
So.
you brought up Death Triangle and what they've been doing, and I think that's the best example of what you were saying before of guys who their bond is stronger than their ego. And they do a really great job of portraying that. Every one of them could be a world championship level guy. And every possible pairing of them could be a tag team championship level team, and that's kind of an amazing thing to have in a trio. I think that they make an excellent faction because of that, because they're a counter example of what you usually see. Normally, everybody has to have a specific role and know what their role is, or else they just get in each other's way, like you used to see with Team Taz. There were just too many Chiefs, not enough Indians. When Brian Cage, and there was addition by subtraction by getting rid of him. But with the Death Triangle, it's quite the opposite. Right now, those two are the tag team championships, have the tag team championships, and so we assume that Pac is going to be doing singles things, but that could change anytime. Any of those guys could be top singles guys anytime that they want to be.
Absolutely.
But Andrade is threatening them with I assume outsiders that he's going to bring in, because he's going to bring in someone who is familiar with the AAA style, etc. I don't know who this is going to mean we're going to see. I hope that the answer is Vikingo. That would be awesome if Vikingo and somebody else, like probably Bandito or something, but it doesn't really matter.
Bandito
but
was
actually
the name. Bandito was the name that came to me. Now, obviously, he's mostly been a babyface as far as I'm aware, so
true.
I'm not quite sure how that would work. But in terms
he's
of
not
just
a natural
pure...
heel, but I'd love to see him him and Ray Phoenix
exactly
bouncing off of each other. If
in
somehow you could get Dante Martin in there too, it would just be like, where's Gravity? What happens? Gravity's just like, nah, I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. No, Gravity left the building when those three got in the
exactly.
ring. Absolutely. I got two words for you: trios titles. That's what Death Triangle, like, that's the first thing I see. Death Triangle, I'm like, just put they don't even need to be real. Just like put something on these guys to thank them for the fact that as a trio they're just exactly what you want a trio to be.
That's a really good point. And of course, you've got a lot of other ones like this Super Click now, groups that are specifically trios. I just feel like too much gold is going to make people there to be less drama of it's hard to get any gold, and it's really a struggle to get there, and that's an important part of the
Yeah.
storytelling that they tell. I worry about adding trios. That's because that's three guys who have gold, and they're not worried about like climbing rankings and blah blah blah. That's a lot of guys to suddenly take out of all the other title pictures, plus anybody chasing them.
Yeah. Now,
But they
I would
they do
say
have a big roster. Maybe it is something that
exactly.
could fit.
That's what I would argue is that, by doing that trios thing, you'd actually clear up some space for some of the guys to go after titles, especially guys that maybe we wouldn't expect. So someone maybe like a Powerhouse Hobbs or like a Dante Martin or a Lee Johnson or someone like that, that if you clear out at minimum 6 guys from that upper echelon to go deal with a trios title, that maybe we could get some unexpected title challenges from guys like that. So it's a debate for a whole different episode of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, but just something to think about since we're on the topic. Speaking of trios,
Sure.
though, the last thing that we're going to talk about here today is the 3-way match on Rampage between Thunder Rosa, Jade Cargill, and Nyla Rose. Now, as far as a match goes, you would think that this would end up in the quick hits, because as a match, it was 5.5 minutes. Not a ton of stuff happened relative to what we've seen from 3-ways in AEW since the promotion began. But to me, the reason why this was so interesting and the reason why we wanted to talk about it in more detail is because of who won and because of how she did it. So Jade Cargill goes over, and she goes over on Thunder Rosa, which to me, that was surprising. At the beginning of the match, Cargill made her entrance, and I heard the fans, and I figured I could definitely see Cargill go over here. The way the commentary was pushing her and saying she's undefeated in AEW, and the Chiron, the graphic, the lower third, saying that like 8 of her 9 matches have been under 2 minutes or whatever the stat was. I'm like, man, they're putting her over strong. I'm like, I could see her going over, but going over Nyla Rose. But no, I mean, they just shot her straight up to the top. And Thunder Rosa has been the most consistently over female babyface that AEW has had since she debuted in the company last year. And they just had Cargill just beat her, and I'm like, wow. I mean, I was not expecting that. What were you expecting that coming out of this match?
No, I was definitely like you. I mean, Nyla Rose was the obvious person to take the pin. But the way that they went about it is really interesting and smart. Because Nyla Rose instead was the person that was tossed to the outside. She took a big bump in order to not be involved. And then under Rosa didn't take Jade Cargill's finisher. Jade Cargill could have still said that she's never been beaten by being she could have been the one neither pinned nor being pinned. She could have been the middle person and still be able to say, I've never been pinned, I've never been submitted, I've never lost a match. Not winning isn't the same as losing. But instead, they're going with Thunder Rosa being in the position of saying, Jade Cargill hasn't hit me with her finisher. Jade Cargill hasn't beaten me one-on-one. Jade Cargill hasn't beaten me in a match where she wasn't able to use steel chairs. She just used chair shots to beat her. And that was interesting. And I think that could lead to a single showdown between them in the future. It could lead to either a standard rules match where it's like you can't use chairs, or or some kind of a hardcore match where both sides are kind of even-handed with the weapons, and both are, instead of just kind of, I mean, they both had the opportunity to use weapons, but in that moment there wasn't much. Well, you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways that they can go with this now.
Yeah,
and I think the real question is, where are they going in terms of are they building just towards a one-on-one confrontation, or are they building someone up as a challenger, which seems a bit off? Does Britt really need another heel challenger? So I don't know. I'm sorry. You were going to say
No,
something.
no, no. That leads in perfectly to what I was going to say, which is I figured that this match was a vehicle for Jade Cargill, um, to show that she is in the upper echelon of the AEW women's division. But I'm with you. I totally expected Nyla Rose to be the one eating the pin, to tell the story that when it comes to monsters in AEW, Jade Cargill is, the alpha dog, so to speak.
Sure.
And that's the story I was expecting. And I was expecting, actually, Jade to somehow hit Nyla Rose with her finisher, and
That would be
that would be
tough.
the story. Well, I know, but that's sort of like, I figured that would be the story coming out of it, and then Thunder Rosa would be able to go do whatever it is that she wants to do. She could, challenge Jade Cargill, or whatever. I don't really know. Um, but I guess coming out of this, the big thing that I'm now thinking is we're putting Jade Cargill over, like you said, so that we can tell the story that Thunder Rosa has never been, that she wasn't pinned or submitted cleanly by Jade, and that needs to happen in order for Jade Cargill to show that she is on that level in AEW. So maybe this is something for Thunder Rosa to do before they're ready to put her in a feud with Britt Baker. Because
Oh, that's a really good point.
when that feud ultimately happens, that it will be, I think, a make and break for both, really for Thunder Rosa, but I think for both women for a long time. If Rosa goes over, she'll be the champion, obviously. If Britt goes over, not only will she still be the champion, but I think she'll be the champion for a long time. I think that will be the indication that we are in for a year plus long title reign for Britt Baker. And then for Thunder Rosa, what does she do after that? So that really is a crossroads for the women's division as a whole, because it'll show you where they're at. Are they willing to put all of their eggs in the Britt Baker basket for a long period of time, or are they willing to do a title change? So to me, this feels like it's just delaying the inevitable for that one, and it's something for Thunder Rosa to do. And I think, again, they have to be careful, because, like we said, it's harder for a heel to lose than it is for a babyface to lose. But if Thunder Rosa is going to come out of this, go over Jade Cargill in a singles match, I think the story is there that, it's not going to hurt Jade too much. It'll be her first loss, and it'll be to Thunder Rosa, who's been consistently put over as one of the best wrestlers in the world, and she is. And then it'll allow Thunder Rosa to go deal, presumably, with Britt Baker, and allow Jade Cargill to go do something else. I don't know what she wants to do. All I'm saying is, at this point, I'm done with Nyla Rose. I'm done with her. There's nothing that she can do in AEW that I really care at all about. I think she's been overused. I think everything that she does, there are now people that do it better. Like, there are people that cut better promos than her. There always have been. There are people that cut better promos than Vicky Guerrero. I think now Jade Cargill is being presented as a better monster than Nyla Rose, and I prefer her in that role. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what there else really is for Nyla Rose to do, but I don't know. I'm done with her, and Thunder Rosa and Jade Cargill, I think, can have some interesting back and forth here, and presumably eventually Thunder Rosa will go against Britt Baker.
Well, I don't know. I think Nyla Rose is very valuable in her role, which is not at the top, and probably won't be at the top anytime very soon. But she had a great series with Ty Conti in my eyes. She
I
had
agree with that.
a great run in the Eliminator tournament, and went far enough in it and beat enough people surprisingly in it that it really helped Ryo Mizunami to finally be able to overcome her. And that in roles like that, she's going to be very, very useful in the future. And I think that it's worth noting that she is a lot better than she was when she was champion. Just technically, she's able to. I mean, you go back and watch the matches that were very celebrated at the time between her and Riho, and the the suspension of disbelief that you have to have in how long the Riho hangs on that damn draping knee drop or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
she's so much faster at that stuff now, and it really improves her matches when she has a high profile match. But she's not someone that they see as someone who's any wins that she gets are building her for her next loss, which is true of everybody on one level or another. But that's definitely her role right now is to beat scrubs in order to be beat by someone to build them up. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that role. But
Every
Jade
company needs
Cargill.
it.
Exactly. But what you were saying about where they might be going with Jade Cargill and Thunder Rosa, it's definitely possible that Thunder Rosa demands a first one-on-one rematch right away, and that leads that getting that win back basically leads to finally the title match between her and Britt Baker. But it's also certainly possible they keep them apart in order so that Thunder Rosa builds herself back up to number one contendership, then takes that title, and then who do you have built? Hopefully, has enough reps in to be a great first challenger for Thunder Rosa if you've kept them apart after this because she has this win over her.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. So I guess my question that we'll end on here, my question to you is, who should be the next, presumably babyface, that goes against Nyla Rose, maybe against Jade Cargill, and eventually, builds herself into that upper echelon? I mean, I think right now in AEW you have Britt Baker, you have Ruby Soho, who immediately came in there and is in the upper tier and obviously just challenged for the title. You have Thunder Rosa, who's always going to be there. And then to me, you have a lot of women that are sort of just waiting to get up to that level. So who do you think should be AEW's next female star that they're looking at and saying this is someone who can be in the upper echelons of the women's division for a long-term period?
Well, they've already given her a focus match by giving her the opportunity to get a little bit more of a match out of Jade than most people do. Layla Hirsch is always one of my top choices for who I'd love to see have more success and be more featured on AEW. Love her work as far as building someone up to be a top babyface contender. But there's also Serena Deeb, not on the babyface side, but love to see more of her as well. We're going to get to see her next this coming Wednesday up against excuse me,
Hikaru Shida.
Hikaru Shida. And that's a match that I'm really looking forward to. She has an amazingly focused style. I mean, if you take a look at her mix of offense in her matches so far, she is more focused on specific types of offense than just about anybody. Fouls, technical offense, and throws, and just that's what she uses, and she just leaves the rest out, and it makes it just for a really interesting, different style of match.
Yeah, and
so I'm really looking forward to that on Wednesday.
Absolutely. Different than anything that we see in the AEW women's division, and certainly much different than Britt Baker. So that would be one where, we talk about it all the time, that who do you put Britt Baker against? How do you deal with a heel who is over like a babyface? Someone like Serena Deeb, to me, is a perfect, someone who's perfect to put in there, because fans will love to boo her and her style of offense. And so if she just develops that little bit of edge that we've seen from her in the past, if she applies that in a main event level scenario with Britt Baker, that to me is a feud that has some legs if they want to go that direction.
It's possible. I don't see them throwing more heels at Britt Baker right now. I'm thinking that they're trying to have her act more as a heel, even though that she's not going to get booed. But it remains to be seen. We'll see. We'll see if they start just saying, all right, you know what? She's going to keep saying bad things about the fans, but let's have her fight heels. Everyone cheers her anyway. It's not impossible. I don't see it going that direction, but it might.
Yeah, well, it's an option there if they want to do that, and I think Serena Deeb, if they wanted to go that route, is a perfect person to put in there. That would really make that story work. Folks, thank you so much for joining us on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. Obviously, there is a lot of stuff coming on Pro Wrestling Musings between the YouTube channel, which if you're not already, go subscribe to it, between the website where we're picking up new writers all the time, including AEW Metrics, which is really interesting stuff that you should go check out right now on ProWrestlingMusings.com. Really interesting look at some of the numbers behind AEW. And of course, all of the normal things that we do from our stats, Styles Make Fights, Tail of the Tape, power rankings, all that stuff that goes on ProWrestlingMusings.com. So make sure you are there. Sergi, you know the deal. Please tell the people where they can find you.
Well, I do my Styles Makes Fight columns, and those can be found on one of the tabs at ProWrestlingMusings.com. Once you're there, if you'd like to see any of my other work, just click on my profile and you'll see everything, including the power rankings for factions, and then there will be other types of content coming as soon as I have it ready. But the thing that I'm looking for the most is I'd love to have more interactions and more feedback with the folks that read my stuff. If you ever have any questions, I'm on Twitter. My Twitter... The way to get to me on Twitter is in the description of this video, and it's in all of my columns. And just send questions or send your perspective and start a conversation, because that's what everybody who writes for Pro Wrestling Musings is looking for. More than anything, it's just like we'd love to get more conversations about this started, because we write about it because we're interested in it. This is not a paid job. Nobody's making their living on creating content for Pro Wrestling Musings. Right. We're in it because we're just huge fans of this and of this type of analysis of pro wrestling. It's just our passion. And we would just love to get more conversations. It seems like all the conversations are among people who write for ProWrestlingMusings.com, and that's fine. A lot of great conversations there, but that doesn't have to be just people who write for us. Anybody, is just, if they have a perspective or a question, we just really welcome that.
Yeah, very, very well said, and that is absolutely the truth. I have been Griff from GA. You can follow me on my personal YouTube channel, General Admission Wrestling. While you're there, if you're not already, subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel. We always have some cool stuff going up there, and more cool stuff planned in the future. So again, that's why you should be subscribed. And for nothing else, because that's where the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast goes. It's the best way to listen or watch, because you get to see all the stats that we're talking about. But if that's not your thing, give us a 5-star review, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're more of an audio type of person, you can find us there as well. Thank you so much for joining us. More Pro Wrestling Musings podcast in the future, talking about all things AEW and maybe some other stuff. The only way that you can tell us the only way that we know if you want to hear other stuff is if you reach out to us on Twitter. So go find Sergi, go to at PW Musings, whatever you want to do. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. We really appreciate you.